World Geography, Chapter 12, Lesson 2, the history of the regions, both Northern and Southern Europe. Now, we're studying this because some of the most influential civilizations in the world originated in these two regions. And as you read, I want you to think about the accomplishments and the past influence that it has on us today, these lasting effects of these great empires that we have learned about throughout the course of history that are still resonating today. Early history of the regions. Why were early civilizations in Northern and Southern Europe important? Southern Europe produced two of the world's most influential civilizations, ancient Greece and ancient Rome. Greek and Roman, or classical culture, continued to affect our world. During the Middle Ages, the period between AD 500 and 1500, Christianity and other classical ideas helped build a new, orderly European civilization. But wars and invasion were still common. The Vikings of the Northern Europe were seafarers and invaders. Their voyages changed the history of Western Europe and North America. Ancient Greece. Greece's many mountains and seacoasts influenced the ancient Greeks to form separate communities called city-states. Each city-state was independent, but each one was linked to other city-states by Greek language and culture. Powerful city-states such as Athens and Sparta were rivals, but they faced a common enemy to the east in mighty Persia. When the Persians invaded the Greek mainland in 490 BC, the combined forces of Athens' navy and Spartan's army spent 40 years defeating them. After the Persian Wars, Athens emerged as the most developed city-state. Its achievements were momentous. For example, the idea of philosophers such as Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle are still studied. Greek art set a standard for beauty that later influenced the Romans and inspires people to this day. Athens was also the first known democracy. The free citizens of Athens enjoyed a way of life that was unique in ancient times. Wars weakened the Greek city-states, and Macedon, a kingdom north of Greece, took advantage. The Macedonian king, Alexander the Great, extended his rule over not only Greece, but also Asia Minor, now the Asian part of Turkey, Persia, and Egypt. Even though Alexander died at the age of 33, he spread Greek culture throughout an empire that lasted almost 300 years. So you can see on this map here the different colors that indicate the different empires that arose throughout this time in what was being covered up as the Alexander the Great's empire, the Persian empire that tried to infiltrate from this eastern direction to the west, and then obviously the Roman Empire that we're going to read about that covers almost this entire landscape around the Mediterranean. Roman empires. While the Greek city-states were at their height, another group was slowly gaining power to the west on the Italian peninsula. A series of small settlements built on hills along the Tiber River eventually merged into a single city that became Rome. Later, the Romans put government in the hands of consuls who were elected to office annually. This was the birth of the Roman Republic. The Romans had a talent for warfare, and they set out to conquer their neighbors. By 275 BC, they controlled the Italian peninsula, inspiring Rome to add even more territory. Spain, Sicily, Macedonia, Greece, and Asia Minor fell to Roman armies. So that's all of this area and this area to this northern portion of Europe. Eventually, a powerful military leader, Julius Caesar, seized control of Rome. After Caesar was assassinated, his great-nephew Octavian, given the title Augustus, became the first of a series of emperors, and the Roman Republic was no more. The new Roman Empire expanded eastward to Egypt, westward to the British Isles, so it wrapped all the way around here and all the way up into Britain. In AD 330, Emperor Constantine moved the capital of the empire from Rome to the Greek city of Byzantium in what is now Turkey, so right over here. This location was closer to important trade routes to China and Southwest Asia. The new capital, renamed Constantinople, was also farther from the barbarians who were attacking the Roman Empire in the west. Up in this area, as the Roman civilization took hold, the people who had originally lived here eventually started to fight back and were successful in fighting back. Repeated invasions continued to weaken the Western Empire. German invaders took control of Rome in AD 476. This was the end of the Western Roman Empire. The Eastern Empire lasted for almost the next 1,000 years until it fell in 1453 to the Ottoman Turks. The Turks changed the name from Constantinople to Istanbul. That's what it's still called today. The Viking Age. So now from southern Europe up into the northern portions. In the AD 700s, ships carrying warriors from Scandinavia began raiding the coasts of Western Europe. At home, these warriors were farmers or young men eager for adventure. At sea, they were pirates called Vikings, and they spread fear and destruction wherever they Their ships traveled. In AD 793, they raided and destroyed the abbey at Holy Island in northeastern England, killing and enslaving the monks. Later, the Vikings conquered other parts of Britain, as well as Ireland and what is now Normandy in France. The Vikings were excellent seafarers, and they sailed their longships great distances to explore and to trade. They sailed westward across the Atlantic, founding settlements in Iceland and Greenland. About the year 1000, Leif Erikson led the Vikings to a land he named Vinland. Vinland was Newfoundland in Canada. Erikson became the first European known to have reached North America. The Vikings followed a pagan religion which was based on ancient myths and had a number of different gods. After about AD 1000, Viking groups throughout Scandinavia began to convert to Christianity. The Viking threat died out as more Scandinavians stayed home. That contributed to building the kingdoms of Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. However, traces of Viking culture, especially their epic tales of adventure and heroism, remain in the British Isles and other parts of Western Europe. Discovery and rebirth. How did the Renaissance pave the way for voyages of discovery? So far, we've learned about a lot of the conquering and warfare that took place throughout the history in both Northern and Southern Europe. Now we're going to focus on the other types of achievement and advancement of society throughout this time in history. During the long period known as the Middle Ages, many of the ancient achievements were forgotten. Important manuscripts were lost or destroyed, and many of the writings that survived ended up in the East, where scholars could still read classical Greek. Beginning in the 1300s, a curiosity for Greek and Roman learning took hold in the Italian city of Florence, where poets such as Dante, Petrarch were inspired by ancient literature. To them, these works were freer, more rational, and more joyous than the works of the world. The Renaissance. When the Byzantine Empire fell in 1453, many scholars traveled west with the ancient Greek manuscripts. At the same time, a practical printing press was invented in Germany. Suddenly, it was possible to print many copies of manuscripts that until then had to be lettered by hand. People could now own and read books. These breakthroughs resulted in a period of artistic and intellectual activity known as the Renaissance. The Italian city of Florence became a center of learning and culture. Architects drew inspiration from the ancients and created new architectural styles. Painters and sculptors, such as Leonardo da Vinci, looked to nature for inspiration. Curiosity about the natural world also led to the birth of modern science. In 1609, Italian astronomer Galileo designed a telescope to observe the moon and the planets. Galileo's observations helped prove Copernicus's theory that the planets, including Earth, orbit the sun, heliocentricity. The Renaissance began in Italy, but Galileo's work influenced scientists throughout Europe. Empires and exploration. By the 1400s, Europeans wanted to do more business with China and India, but overland routes were long and dangerous. Prince Henry of Portugal inspired sailors and navigators to find a sea route to Asia by sailing around Africa. In 1488, Portuguese sea captain Bartholomew Diaz reached the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa. 10 years later, Vasco da Gama rounded the Cape and sailed to India. The Portuguese established sea trade with South Asia. Christopher Columbus, an Italian navigator, had a different idea. Why not reach Asia via a westward sea route? Spain agreed to finance the expedition, and Columbus left Spain with 3 ships on August 3rd in 1492. Columbus underestimated the size of Earth and overestimated the size of Asia. When he finally saw land, he assumed he had reached Asia. In fact, it was the Caribbean island that Columbus ran into. Columbus, like Leif Erikson before him, had landed in the Americas. Through its expedition to the Americas, Spain became the most powerful country in Europe. The Spanish built an empire in Mexico, Central America, and South America. They conquered the Aztec of Mexico and the Incan Empire in South America, and they enslaved the native peoples of the Caribbean. Contact between Europe and the Americas also resulted in the exchange of goods. Europeans brought wheat, olives, bananas, coffee, sugar, horses, sheep, pigs, and cattle to the Americas. In exchange, the Europeans received tomatoes, corn, potatoes, squash, cacao, are also a source of chocolate, hot peppers. This commerce is known as the Columbian Exchange. What's left out in this idea is, as these goods are going back and forth and these countries are gaining wealth, is obviously the oppression and the conquering of the people that live there and the enslavement of Africans to become part of this trade and become of the plantation work to grow those types of goods in this area. Religions in the region. Meanwhile, Christianity had become identified with Europe. Rome considered itself the seat of Christianity as early as the 100s. When the Roman Empire was split into Eastern and Western empires, Christianity in the empire also split into Eastern and Western branches. The Western branch evolved into the Roman Catholic Church, which was dominant in Italy and Spain throughout Western Europe. The Eastern branch became the Eastern Orthodox Church, centered in Greece and parts of Eastern Europe. The rise of religion of Islam threatened the power of Christianity and their churches. The Moors were Muslims, followers of Islam, who invaded Spain from North Africa in the AD 700s and ruled most of Spain for more than 700 years. The Byzantine Empire fell to the Ottoman Turks, another Muslim people. In 1453, under Ottoman rule, Greek Christians were free to practice their religion, but their rights were limited compared to those of Muslims. Over the next few centuries, Greek Christians struggled to preserve their traditions and beliefs. Today, the vast majority of people in Greece still belong to the Greek Orthodox Church. During the 1520s, the ideas of Martin Luther contributed to the spread of the Protestant Reformation. Kingdoms across northern Europe broke away from the Roman Catholic religion. Their countries adopted some form of Protestantism as their official state religion. If you take a look at this map, you can kind of see where the predominant religion or the mixing of those religions took place after the course of history plays out in Europe. This is in 1500. So we're into the development of Christianity, the spread of Christianity throughout the Roman Empire and now throughout these other European nations. Now we've got the Protestant Reformation, the breaking, it's called the Great Schism, the breaking of the Catholic Church into the Eastern Church and the Western Church. And you can see by these different colors the different types of faiths that have been established in this part of the world. Green being Roman Catholic, pink being Protestant or Luther, purple being Lutheran or Reformed, and then obviously the influence of Islam as well, this darker pink, and the mixing of where those different groups of people would have their overlying or overlapping cultures. History in the modern era. What has been the relationship between Northern and Southern Europe over the last 200 years? What's going on in these places? The 1800s brought sweeping changes to the region. The Scandinavian countries saw their military glory vanish, but they became prosperous democracies. Spain and Portugal lost much of their overseas empires, followed by conflicts at home. Greece won freedoms from the Turks. In Italy, separate territories, except for San Marino and what later became Vatican City, united in 1870. So these different territories became one portion with Italy. Conflict and war. During the 1900s, Northern and Southern Europe were involved in both world wars. After fighting a civil war in the 1930s, Spain stayed out of World War II. However, Italy, ruled by dictator Benito Mussolini, sided with Nazi Germany in that conflict. The Italians were defeated by the Allied U.S. and British forces in 1943, a year and a half before the war ended in Europe. The period following World War II brought even more political changes. Italy became a democracy and began to rebuild its economy. Greece suffered a brutal civil war between communists and opponents of communism, and Spain, Portugal, and Greece joined Italy as democracies. The modern era. Since 1945, Scandinavia has enjoyed a high standard of living as well as political and social freedoms. Its leaders worked for world peace and economic growth in the world's new nations. Beginning in the 1990s, the nations of Northern and Southern Europe developed closer ties with each other and with other European countries as members of the European Union. So throughout the 1900s, obviously, war and conflict riddled this entire region, but now we've got the development of democracies and more civilized discourse happening between those, being now that we're more of a civilized society overall and the continuous drive of economic activity to better the lives of people. That wraps up our reading for the study of the history of Northern and Southern Europe. Your assignment today is to take care of your lesson quiz. God's blessings.